The joint hearings will please come to order. Our first witness is Mr. Glenn A. Robinette. Mr. Robinette, would you wish to introduce your counsel for the record?
Yes, sir. My counsel is Mr. Mark Toohey.
Mr. Robinette, will you please rise, raise
Yes,
your
sir.
hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Mr. Barbador.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Robinette, did General Richard Secord pay you to install a security system at the residence of Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North?
Sir, on the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer the question and assert my constitutional rights.
Committees have obtained orders from the United States District Court which provide that you may not refuse to testify or provide other information to the committees on the basis of your privilege against self-incrimination. Copies of the orders are available at the witness table and will be placed in the record of these hearings. Accordingly, you are directed to answer the committee's question and to provide any other information which may be required.
I concur in the statement of the Senate Select Committee Chairman on behalf of the House Select Committee.
Mr. Barbadori, please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Robinette, you have a soft voice, so I'm going to ask you to please try and speak up and to speak into the microphone.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Robinette, you were employed by the Central Intelligence Agency from 1951 until 1971. Could you tell us where in the Central Intelligence Agency you worked, what division?
Yes, I was associated with something called technical services.
And what did you do in the Technical Services Division?
These were technical type of operations in electronics and optics and other fields that were utilized in support of classified operations abroad.
You retired from the CIA in 1971?
Yes, sir.
And since 1971, you have been involved in a number of jobs as a private security consultant. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
Mr. Robinette, do you know a man named Tom Kleins?
Yes, sir, I do.
Do you know Richard Secord?
Yes, sir, I do.
When did you meet him?
I think I first met him socially in the early 1980s, 81, 82.
Who introduced you?
Thomas Kleins.
Mr. Robinette, in addition to being a friend of Mr. Kleins, you've also worked with him in several business ventures, have you not?
Only one.
That one was EATSCO, was it not?
Oh, yes, there was yes, there was EATSCO, yes, sir.
Mr. Kleins was one of the owners of EATSCO, and you were one of the employees of EATSCO,
yes,
correct?
Sir.
Mr. Robinette, there have been reports in the press attributed to committee staff members that you have information and would testify about an interest that General Secord had in EATSCO. Do you have any information that Richard Secord had any kind of interest in EATSCO?
No, I've never heard General Secord's name mentioned during the short period of time that I was at EATSCO, nor have I since that time.
You have no knowledge of General Secord having any interest in EATSCO, correct?
No knowledge at any time.
And you have never told any member of either the House or the Senate committee staffs that General Secord had a hidden interest in EATSCO, correct?
No, I honored the restrictions. I have nothing to tell, and I was shocked, quite shocked, at an article, a lead article, a front-page article in the New York Times stating that I had knowledge of that type. Plus, I also was an associate of a gentleman named Frank Turple, who is a fugitive from the United States. I've never met Frank Turple in my life. This reporter never contacted me. He said I was unavailable. I'm quoting from the paper. I'm as available as the Washington Monument.
Mr. Robinette, I know that Senator Bourne plans to ask you more questions about the Eatsco matter.
Yes,
I want to
sir.
move on and ask
Yes.
you if prior to 1986, did you have any business dealings with Richard Secord?
No, sir.
Did there come a time in 1986 when he did ask you to do some work for him?
Yes, sir.
When was that?
Probably late March 1986.
And what did he ask you to do?
He had a problem with people making allegations about him, and he wanted to determine the source of these allegations.
Could you describe those allegations?
Certainly. It was prior to a civil suit that took place in May. However, it went along the lines that General Secord dealt in drugs and conspiracy against the government and other illegal type of activities.
There were allegations that he wanted you to check on, that people said he was running guns. Isn't that true?
Yeah, that was an additional one, yes, sir.
And among the people that he asked you to look into were Martha Honey and Tony Avergan, people who were then contemplating a lawsuit against General Secord?
Yes, I believe they had published some reports along those lines, and that was one of several names given to me.
And what kind of investigative work did he want you to do?
In most instances, he didn't know these people, the names that he had given me, and he wanted me to determine who they were and why they were making such statements against him.
Did he offer to pay you for this work?
Yes, he did.
And how much did he agree to pay you?
Approximately $4,000 a month plus expenses.
Did you accept his offer?
Yes, I did.
When did you start working for him?
Just about the beginning of April, 1986.
And when did you receive your first payment from Mr. Secord for this investigative work?
Sometime probably toward the end of April 1986.
Were you paid in cash or by check?
The first payment was in cash.
Subsequently, did you receive some payments in the form of checks?
Yes, I did, sir.
Could you look at Exhibit 2A, 2B, and 2C, which are checks made out to you
Oh, thank you.
and signed by Richard Secord
2A.
on a Stanford Technology Trading Group International account? Do you recognize those checks?
June 24th that's the second June payment. And 2C is the August payment for $6,000.
Yes, sir, I recognize all three.
And are those checks that General Secord paid to you for the investigative work that you were doing for him?
Yes, sir.
Speak up a little bit.
Apart from these checks, were you later paid in cash for some of the investigative work you were doing?
Yes, sir, I was.
And for how long were you paid for the work you were doing for General Secord?
Approximately 9 months of 1986, starting in April and ending in about December.
When did you receive your last payment from him for this work?
I believe December 1986.
Let me refresh your memory. Didn't you receive a payment in March of this year?
Yes, sir.
And that was a $2,000 payment,
Yes,
correct?
sir.
Did you continue working for General Secord on this investigative assignment even after you stopped being paid?
Yes, I did, sir.
How long did you continue that work?
I think probably till early April 1987.
So it's fair to say that you've done some work for General Secord for which you have not yet been paid, is that right?
Yes, sir.
About how much does he owe you?
Well, we had, I would say approximately $15,000, but in all fairness to General Secord, I did instigate a conversation with him in late December or early January, in which I said I knew at that time he was under a great deal of pressure, and that he concurred and said that he had difficulty in paying me, and I volunteered that I would be certainly willing to continue to be the recipient of information on investigations that I had started. And I would do it on a time-available basis, and General Secord could pay me whenever he could.
So you reached an agreement with General Secord that you'd continue to work and he would pay you when he could, is that
Yes,
right?
yes, sir, that's correct.
Did there come a time in the spring of 1986 when General Secord asked you to do some different work for him?
Yes, sir.
And what he asked you to do was to install a security system out at the residence of Colonel North, correct?
Basically, that's correct. Yes.
Can you look at Exhibit 1, which is your appointment calendar, and from that calendar, can you determine when it was that General Secord asked you about this security system?
It's April.
It's of April. You went out on the 30th of April.
It was approximately, the date is approximately April 29.
Well, it's not approximately, it is April 29,
It is
correct?
April 29, 1986.
Okay.
Sorry.
And could you tell us what he said to you?
He mentioned that Colonel North had been experiencing some threats at his house against the family, and that if I was interested, if I thought I could do it, he would like me to go see Mrs. North and make plans to implement a security system at the residence.
Did he describe the kind of threats that Colonel North complained about?
I think he touched on them at that time, but subsequently there was more detail from Colonel North.
What were you told about the threats that Colonel North was facing?
Yeah. There were instances of someone driving along the road paralleling their house, Colonel North's home, and shining lights at late hours when Colonel North was not there, which frightened the wife and the children. There was an instance of sugar or sand in the gas tank, punctured tires, threats by telephone from unknown sources, and I believe on several instances there were boxes, bags containing unknown objects found in the mailbox that was external to their property but situated on the public road adjoining the property.
Is it fair to characterize these kind of threats as in the nature of harassment?
I can't say they were harassment. I don't know who originated them.
Was there any discussion about possible threat from terrorists?
I think that was used at that time, but subsequently it came up more specifically.
When you say it was used at that time in the meeting with General Secord, he may have mentioned terrorists.
He might have used
Later on,
it.
you discussed it with Colonel North
Yeah.
as well, correct?
He was trying to give me an idea of what Mrs. North was experiencing, and I think he felt that a meeting face-to-face with Mrs. North would be more factual.
Did he tell you what kind of security system he wanted you to install?
No, sir.
Did he discuss who was going to pay for the system with you at this initial meeting?
No, sir.
At some point in the meeting, did he call Mrs. North?
Yes, he called Mrs. North.
And later in the day, you also called Mrs. North and arranged to meet her at her home the next day, correct?
Yes, the purpose of his call was to introduce me by telephone, and I subsequently called Mrs. North, mentioned General Secord's call, and we agreed to meet, Mrs. North and I agreed to meet the next day.
Did you go out to the North residence on April 30th?
Yes, I did.
And could you describe what you did when you went out there?
Certainly. I went to the residence, introduced myself to Mrs. North, told her that I understood she was experiencing some difficulties and felt uneasy about her own security and the security of the family. Asked her to describe in more detail about the flashing lights and any other incidents. Told her that I was going to try to come up with a system and procedures that would protect her and the family against personal injury and kidnapping. I then asked her permission to go around the house and walk around the property, and came back to her, told her thank you very much, and left. I think the whole visit probably took 1 hour.
Based on your discussion with Mrs. North and your survey of the house, did you make some decisions about the kind of security system that you thought should be installed at the North residence?
I had a basic idea.
In general terms, what were you thinking about?
Something to restrict vehicular traffic from driving in the open gateway, and something to give a warning to the family if an attempt was made to penetrate the residence, and something to provide an automatic system that in the event of any intrusion, an off-site location would be automatically signaled to send assistance either from the law enforcement or the fire department.
Up until this point, had you met Colonel North?
No, I had not.
Can you again look at Exhibit 1, your calendar, and tell us when it was that you first met with Colonel North?
I met with Colonel North on May 5th, 1986, at the Executive Office Building.
Who arranged that meeting?
General Secord.
Did he go with you to the meeting?
Yes, he did.
Tell us what happened.
I met General Secord downtown. He took me to the Executive Office Building. We signed in and went upstairs, I believe, I think to a third floor, to Colonel North's office. He seemed to be quite busy. Colonel North was quite busy. I think I recall seeing Miss Hall. We waited a few moments, and Colonel North then, General Secord then introduced Colonel North to me, and as the gentleman who had visited his house and his wife and was going to try to implement some security procedures to protect the family.
And after being introduced to Colonel North, what did you say to him and what did he say to you?
I told him that I had some basic ideas how to protect the family, that I was extremely conscious that this was a family, this was a home, and not a sack base, and that I would try to implement procedures that would not seriously affect the lifestyle.
And what was Colonel North's reaction?
I would say very enthusiastic, very pleasant. He was extremely cordial. It was a very short meeting.
Did you have any discussion with Colonel North at this meeting about who was going to pay for this system?
No, sir, not at that time.
At that point, did you have any idea as to how much the system was going to cost?
I think I had a general idea, at least I thought I did.
In any event, you hadn't yet obtained an estimate from any of the contractors, is that right?
No, one of the reasons is that I was considering putting in a surveillance system, an optical surveillance system, to see if we could identify who was stopping on the side road and who was leaving packages in the mailbox. And I hadn't yet technically decided how to do it, to have it operate automatically, and or who would do it.
What role did General Secord play at this meeting?
He had very little, if anything, to say. He sat very quietly.
Did you meet with Colonel North again 5 days later on the 10th of May?
Yes, I did, sir.
And what was the purpose of that meeting?
I had reached a point then where I had formulated more specific ideas as to what would be useful and fit into their lifestyles.
Where did you meet with Colonel North this time?
I met with Colonel North at General Secord's office in the Tyson's Corner area of Virginia. That's Stanford Technology.
And was General Secord at this meeting as well?
Yes, he was.
Was there any discussion at this second meeting about how much you thought this system might cost?
Yes, there was.
What did you say about it?
At this time, I described in more specific detail as to what I thought would be a useful system to protect the family and the children from any threats. I believe at this time was the first time, or in more specific detail, when Colonel North mentioned his concern of terrorism. I summarized by telling him, after describing the system, I summarized then by telling him the estimated cost, in my opinion, of the system.
And what was that estimated cost?
Somewhere around $8,000 to $8,500.
What was his reaction when you told him about the cost of the system?
He concurred and said, please try to keep it along those lines. Remember, I'm a poor lieutenant colonel.
Other than that reference, was there any discussion at the meeting about who was going to pay for the system?
No, sir.
Mr. Robinette, when did you decide on a contractor for this security system?
Sometime between the 10th and I believe the 19th of May.
And can you tell us the name of the contractor you had in mind?
Certainly, sir. I selected a company called Vaytech.
Why did you choose Vaytech?
I had known Vaytech for approximately 3 to 4 years prior to this date. They were comprised of a group of some of the individuals, of former CIA colleagues, and I knew them to be extremely reliable, and I was most comfortable dealing with them because they had a great deal of field experience. And I contacted them, and they certainly agreed to do the job.
Mr. Robinette, please turn to Exhibit 3, which is a $6,000 check to Vaytech drawn on your account. Do you recognize that check?
Yes, sir, I do. Yes, sir, I do.
And what is that payment for?
That was the initial down payment requested by Vaytech in order for them to order the equipment and get the installation started.
When did you make this payment to Vaytech?
19 May 1986.
And whose money was this $6,000?
This money was my money.
After making this payment, did you seek reimbursement from someone?
Yes, I did, sir.
Did you go to Colonel North or Mrs. North and ask them for the money?
No, sir, I did not.
Did you send them a bill?
No, sir.
Who did you go to?
I went to General Secord.
Why did you go to General Secord?
I considered him the person who had given me assignment, and that was the one I was going to report to.
And when you went to General Secord, how much money did you ask him for?
$7,000.
Why did you ask him for $7,000 when you had paid $6,000 for the down payment?
The additional $1,000 was to cover my time and expenses associated with this project.
How long after making this payment did you go to General Secord?
I think almost that same time.
And when you went to General Secord, did he object in any way to making this payment?
Now, the conversation, as I recall, at this date, the conversation was very brief. It had been similar to other conversations I had with him on the other matter, in which I simply told him what I was expected to be paid, what I had incurred.
And did he object in any way to making the payment?
No, sir.
Did he suggest to you that Colonel North should be the one to pay for the system?
No, sir.
Instead, he simply produced the money and paid you, correct?
Yes, sir. He appeared to consider it as another one of my expenses.
Did he pay you by check or in cash?
Paid me in cash, I believe.
And where did he get the $7,000 in cash that he paid you?
Do you mean the source?
I mean, when you were sitting in his office with him, where did he physically get the $7,000 from?
I was sitting at his desk. He was sitting behind his desk, and he turned to his right and took it from some location there, which could have been a drawer or could have been a briefcase. I don't know.
What did you do with the $7,000?
Put it in my bag and went home.
Mr. Robinette, please turn to Exhibit 4A and 4B. Exhibit 4A is your bank statement for May,
Yes.
and Exhibit 4B is a deposit slip for $7,000.
Yes, sir.
These records show you made a deposit of $7,000 on May 20. Is that the $7,000 you got from General Secord?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Robinette, when did the installation of this security system start, and when did it finish?
I believe it started sometime in May, early May, and it was completed, I think, the first week of July, 1986.
Initially, you've testified initially that you intended that VATEC would be the sole contractor. At some point, did you make a decision to bring in a second contractor to do part of the system?
Yes, I did, sir.
And what is the name of that contractor?
Automatic door.
And what did you ask Automatic Door to do?
I asked them to install a remote control gate at the entrance area to Colonel North's property that would operate similar to a automatic garage door installation, whereby the gate could be remotely controlled, either coming in or going out, so that occupants of vehicles didn't have to get out and perhaps subject themselves to injury or kidnapping. Also, that the system would have an audio communication contact between the gate and the house, whereby Mrs. North could look out the window after receiving a buzz, ask who it was, and if she felt that they were authorized to come in, she could press a button from the house and the gate was automatically released and the driver could come in.
So Automatic Door was responsible for the electric gate. Was VATEC responsible for the rest of the system?
Yes, sir.
Can you describe for us what that system involved?
Yes, sir. It's fairly along the lines that I commented earlier. There were heat and smoke detectors installed, which would automatically actuate an alarm at an off-site location. There were door and window alarms detectors installed that would detect an unauthorized entrance into those areas. There were external lights up around the top of the house, and I believe an audible alarm, both of which would go off in the event that someone attempted to break into the home. There was a portable, one or two portable transmitters that Mrs. North or members of the family could carry in their pocket either while they're in the house or out of the house, which if they were accosted or threatened, they could press a button and a radio signal would automatically signal back to the house, and again the central station would be alerted that there was an alarm situation at the house. Also, there was a light installed down at the front gate, which I felt would prevent anyone from having free access or feeling free to do something to the mailbox if the place was lighted at all times.
Mr. Robinette, you've testified that the system was completed in July. Did there come a time in July when you made final payment to VATEC and to Automatic Door?
Yes, sir.
And that was on July 10, was it not?
Yes, sir.
Can you describe the circumstances under which you made these payments?
Yes, sir. I received word from either one of the two vendors that work was completed and that payments were required. And I knew one of the vendors, a fellow in this VATEC I had known for 35 years, and we agreed to meet at a restaurant he's a Nisei friend of mine. We agreed to meet at a Japanese restaurant in Silver Spring, which we had done on a number of other occasions, earlier occasions. I also contacted the gentleman from Auto Door, asked him if he would be willing to meet me at that same location, and he agreed, and we subsequently all met at that restaurant in Silver Spring.
And did you bring the final payments with you?
Yes, I did, in cash.
Take a look at Exhibit 5, which is the invoice from VATEC. From that invoice, can you determine how much it was that you paid VATEC on July 10th as a final payment?
Yes, I can, sir.
How much is that?
$5,703.
Now, you had earlier paid them $6,000 as a down payment. What was the total amount that you paid to VATEC for this system?
$11,703.
Now, take a look at Exhibit 6, which is the invoice from Automatic Door. From that invoice, can you determine how much it was you paid Automatic Door?
Yes, I can, sir.
How much was that?
$2,173.
So in total, you paid Automatic Door and VATEC $13,900, approximately $13,900 for this system. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And on July 10, you paid that figure less $6,000, which by my calculation is about $7,900. Does that sound right to you?
That sounds right to me, sir.
Whose money did you use to pay this $7,900 final payment to VATEC and Automatic Door?
I used my money.
And did you subsequently seek reimbursement from someone?
Yes, I did, sir.
Who did you look to for reimbursement?
General Secord, sir.
And again, did you send Colonel North a bill or ever look to Colonel North for payment for this final payment?
No, sir.
Did Colonel North ever offer to pay you for the installation of the system?
No, sir.
When did you go to General Secord to seek reimbursement?
I don't recall the exact date, but sometime subsequent to that payment in the Silver Spring restaurant.
Now, you had paid out $7,900 in cash. How much did you ask General Secord for?
$9,000.
And the difference between the $7,900 and the $9,000 was your fee and expenses?
Yes, sir.
Did General Secord express any reluctance to make this payment to you?
No, sir. As I recall, he really didn't say much of anything.
When you went to General Secord to seek reimbursement, you told him what you were seeking reimbursement for, didn't you?
Yes, sir.
He knew he was paying you for the security system, didn't he?
That would be my understanding, sir. I usually told him what I was asking to be paid for.
Well, there's no question about that, is there?
Yes, sir. No, sir, there's no question.
Mr. Robinette, turn to Exhibit 7A, which is a $9,000 check drawn on the cashier's check drawn on the Republic National Bank, made out to you and bearing the notation CSF Investments Limited. Have you seen that before?
Yes, sir.
Is that the check that you received from General Secord?
This is a copy, and I assume, yes, sir, to my understanding.
This check was sent to you in the mail after you went to General Secord and asked for payment, correct?
Yes, sir. It's subsequent to the payment. It's several weeks later.
And you took this check and endorsed it and cashed it, correct?
Yes, I did, sir.
Mr. Chairman, the record should reflect that Exhibits 7B through 7F were provided to the committees by Albert Hakim. These exhibits show that on August 18, 1986, Richard Secord gave written instructions to Willard Zucker to issue a check to Glenn Robinette in the amount of $9,000. They also show that Mr. Zucker gave written instructions to the Republic National Bank to draw a check for $9,000 and send it to Mr. Robinette. Finally, the records show that CSF Investments was reimbursed by Udall, one of the Secord enterprise accounts. Mr. Robinette, I just want to summarize your testimony with you to date.
Yes, sir.
You've said so far that you paid Vatech and Automatic Door approximately $13,900 to install the security system, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you in turn received a total of $16,000 in reimbursement from Richard Secord, is that right?
Yes, sir.
A $7,000 payment in May and a $9,000 payment in August, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And is it fair to say that during this entire period of time, you never went to Colonel North to seek reimbursement for this system, and Colonel North never offered to pay you for this system, is that right?
That's correct, sir.
The only person you went to was General Secord, and he paid you for the system, is that right?
Yes, sir.
I want to turn your attention now to November 25, 1986, which is the date of Attorney General Meese's now famous press conference, and ask you where you were at that time.
I was in Costa Rica, sir,
What were you doing there?
doing continuing work for General Secord on this civil suit that had been brought up, I think, in May of that year.
So you were in Costa Rica doing your investigation for General Secord.
Yes, sir.
When did you return to the United States?
Excuse me. That's November 29, 1986.
And at some point after you returned, did you receive a telephone call from Colonel North?
Yes, sir.
Let me put this call in context. First, can you tell me as best you can, when was it that you received the call?
I would have to estimate it's within a week to 10 days of my return from Costa Rica.
Would you say it was in the early part of December?
Yes, sir, it was. I returned on the 29th of November, and it would probably be in that first week.
Did you know at the time you received this call that Colonel North had been removed from his job on the National Security Council staff?
Yes, sir.
Did you also know that Colonel North was being investigated by the FBI and other federal agencies?
Yes, surprisingly enough, the cable news network prominently displayed all of that on the television in Costa Rica, in San Jose, where I was. So I must say that I followed it as closely as possible, if my schedule permitted.
So by the time you had returned, you knew full well what was going on with Colonel North.
I believe so, sir.
Now, tell us as best you can remember what was said in this telephone conversation.
It came somewhat as a surprise, considering that he was in the middle of quite a few problems at that time, but he seemed very friendly. He asked me how I was doing, and I probably mentioned something about his family, which I liked very much, his children. And he said that, by the way, you never sent me a bill, or you've never billed me for that security installation at my residence. And how about you better send me a bill, or please send me a bill.
Did it surprise you that Colonel North was asking you for the first time nearly 6 months after the system was installed to send you a bill? To send him a bill, excuse me?
I think so, yes.
Did it also surprise you in view of the fact that General Secord had already paid for the system?
Yes, sir.
After receiving this telephone conversation, did you prepare a bill?
Yes, sir, I did.
Take a look at Exhibit 8A. Is that a copy of the bill you sent to Colonel North?
Yes, sir, it is.
I want to ask you a few questions about that bill. First, let's start with the date.
Yes, sir.
The date of that bill is July 2nd, 1986.
Yes, sir.
You
Yes,
prepared this bill in December, didn't you?
Yes, sir.
And that date is false, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
The bill is for $8,000 for the security system. That's
yeah.
not what the system cost, is it?
No, sir.
And that amount is false, as well as the date is false, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Robinette, is it fair to say that you intended this bill to look like a first notice?
Yes, sir. This was a date that the equipment was, when the system was finished. This date reflects that. Yes, sir.
And at the same time you prepared this first notice, you also prepared a second notice, didn't you?
Yes, sir. I did.
And that second notice is Exhibit 8B, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
That second notice is basically a copy of the first notice with a note you added at the bottom, isn't it?
Yes, sir, it is.
And the date of the note you added on the bottom, September 22nd, 1986, is also false, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
And the statement in the note at the bottom, which is to the effect that you hadn't had time to send out the notice earlier because you've been busy, is also false, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Robinette, what did you do with these bills when you prepared them?
Put them in an envelope and put Colonel North's name in an envelope, and then inserted that envelope in an outer envelope and addressed it to Colonel North's attorney.
So, to make sure we're clear on this, you put the bills in an envelope addressed to Colonel North, and then you put that envelope in a larger envelope addressed to Colonel North's attorney, correct?
Yes, sir.
And that was so the bills would get to Colonel North but would not be read by his attorneys, correct?
Yes, sir. Well, yes, sir.
Did you send originals or did you...
Excuse me, Counsel.
Sure.
Regarding the question of putting it in the envelope, yes, I wanted the bills to go directly to Colonel North, and I felt that if I put them in a sealed envelope, that the law firm would hand it to him without opening the envelope. I sent it to the law firm because I wasn't too confident that if we went to his home, that he would see it.
Did it concern you at all that you were afraid that the FBI might be intercepting Colonel North's mail?
No, it didn't occur to me.
That wasn't a concern at all?
No, my intent was to be sure that he got it since he asked me for it. The lifestyle at Colonel North's home was pretty much as you would imagine, a wife with a family of 4 children and lots of social affairs and dogs and cats, and I felt more confident in sending it to his attorney's office.
Well, let's be clear about something, Mr. Robinette. When you sent these bills to Colonel North, you never expected him to pay you for this system, did you?
I had been paid. No, I didn't expect him to pay.
General Secord had paid you in full for the system, right?
Yes, I just commented I'd been paid for it.
The real reason that you sent those bills to Colonel North was to protect him, wasn't it?
I believe so, yes, sir, and...
You were trying to provide him with a cover story, weren't you?
Yes, I was trying to help Colonel North. I think my action was one in which the action was one of heart rather than head, and I think you make a mistake if you lead with your heart instead of your head, which I did.
What you were doing, though, was to provide him with a cover story that made it look like Colonel North was supposed to pay for the system, not General Secord.
Yes,
is that right?
He was in the middle of major problems. He'd been fired, and I had some affectionate feelings for the family, and I was trying to assist him for what it was worth.
Did Colonel North ask you in the telephone conversation to send him backdated bills and a second notice and a first notice?
No, sir, he did not.
You did that on your own?
Entirely on my own.
After you sent the bills, did you have a discussion with General Secord?
I don't believe I mentioned it at that time. There's a subsequent occasion when I did.
Prior to we're going to get to that in a minute. That's on the 17th of March. But do you recall discussing the fact that you had sent the bills to General Secord prior to that?
Excuse me, Counsel, is your question, did he recall it prior to the 17th of March?
My question is, didn't sometime in December you have a conversation with General Secord about the bills?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And what was that conversation?
I had received material back from Colonel North, and I believe that is the time when I commented to General Secord that I had billed Colonel North and subsequently had received bits of correspondence from Colonel North.
Well, let's talk about that. Within a few days after sending the bills to Colonel North, you got something back from him, didn't you?
Yes, sir. I would say within a week.
And what you got back were 2 letters that appeared to correspond to the 2 bills you had sent, correct?
That's correct, sir.
And so what you had done is you had sent phony bills, and he had sent back phony letters.
Yes, sir.
Did the letters come from Colonel North in one envelope, or did they come separately?
I believe both of the letters came in one envelope.
And here again, did you receive originals or copies?
I think I got copies, sir.
Mr. Robinette, take a look at Exhibit 9A, which is a letter from Colonel North to you dated 18 May 86, in which the committee has had enlarged and reproduced and is going to be displayed to my right. Is that one of the letters you received from Colonel North?
Yes, it is, sir.
Let me first ask you about the address on the letter. It's 703 Kentland Drive, Great Falls. That's where Colonel North lives, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
And you knew that because you'd been out to the house several times,
A number
correct?
of times to meet the family.
Is it fair to say, Mr. Robinette, that this letter suggests that you and Colonel North discussed 2 options as to how Colonel North might pay for this security system?
I think it's fair to say that, sir.
And the letter is dated 18 May, and so what he's trying to do is to suggest that back in May, you and Colonel North had discussed 2 payment options, correct?
Yes, sir.
The first option that the letter discusses is that you will loan Colonel North the security equipment until he retires from the Marine Corps, and that in exchange, Colonel North will make his home available for commercial endorsement of the security system. Did you ever discuss this payment option with Colonel North?
Not to my recollection, sir.
The second payment option discussed is that you would allow Colonel North to pay off the system in 24 equal monthly increments. Did you ever discuss this payment option with Colonel North?
Not to my recollection, sir.
In fact, you and Colonel North never discussed any payment options, did you?
Not to my recollection, sir.
You were looking to General Secord to pay for this system.
Yes, sir.
Let me turn to the second letter, Exhibit 9B. That letter is also from Colonel North to you, and it's dated 1 October 86. Is that the letter you received from Colonel North for the first time in December?
Yes, sir.
And this letter appears, the way it's drafted, to respond to your phony second notice dated September 22nd, 1986, correct?
Yes, sir.
The address on this letter is different from the first letter. It says 703 Kentland Drive, Falls Church, Virginia. Do you know why it says Falls Church rather than Great Falls?
No, sir.
Do you know that Colonel North once lived in Falls Church?
No, sir. I know nothing about Colonel North's earlier residences.
Mr. Robinette, is it fair to characterize this letter as attempting to suggest that you and Colonel North had agreed on what I had earlier described as the first option for payment? That is, that you and Colonel North had agreed that Colonel North could endorse the security system when he retired from the Marine Corps instead of paying you? Is that what this letter suggests?
I believe so, sir.
Did you and Colonel North ever agree on such a payment plan?
No, sir.
This whole proposal, these two options and the suggestion that there was an agreement is made up, isn't it?
It's not to mine. I've never heard of it, sir. And,
well, you were one of the parties to the
yeah.
supposed agreement, correct?
No, sir.
And there was never any agreement between you and Colonel North as to either of these options, correct?
No, sir.
Excuse me, counsel. Thank you.
Mr. Robinette, these two letters, the first one is dated May 18, 1986, and the second is dated October 1, 1986. Both those dates are false, right?
Yes, sir.
The first time you received these letters was in December 1986, right?
Correct, sir.
And isn't it true that what these letters are simply cooked-up responses to the phony bills you sent Colonel North in December?
I would presume so, sir.
When did you next talk to Colonel North after receiving these letters? Strike that, and let me simply note something for the record, Mr. Chairman. The record should reflect that the committees have retained a well-known document examiner, Lionel Schoenfeld, and he reviewed Exhibits 9A and 9B for the committees. Mr. Schoenfeld was handicapped by not having original letters. However, it is his opinion, based on an examination of the copies, that the signatures of Colonel North on the letters were in fact written by Colonel North, and that the hand-printed note on Exhibit 9B was also written by Colonel North. Mr. Schoenfeld examined the damage to the letters E, G, and U reflected on Exhibit 9B. He could not replicate the damage to these letters by dropping or throwing a typing ball onto the ground. It is his conclusion that the damaged letters have, quote, the appearance of defects that were made by filing away portions of the typeface. Further, he has concluded that it is extremely unlikely that the damage to the letters could have been made by dropping the typing ball, as Colonel North's handwritten note on Exhibit 9B suggests. Let me now move on and ask you, when was the next time you spoke to Colonel North after receiving these letters?
March 16th, 1987.
And did you call Colonel North or did he call you?
He called me, sir.
What did he say to you in this conversation?
Open with the usual niceties. How are you, this type of thing, and I'm sure I responded by asking him again about his family, and he said, let's get together for lunch. I suggested, I thought that was great. I suggested a restaurant downtown, which he said no, that under the circumstances, he felt more comfortable not going to a restaurant, and he invited me to his attorney's office.
Did you know at the time why he had invited you to his attorney's office?
Oh, he asked me to, at that time, to bring, or I surmise, he also asked me to bring copies of these 4 documents.
That is, the 2 bills that you sent Colonel North and the 2 responses you received, correct?
That's correct, sir.
Did you agree to meet him the next day at his attorney's office?
Yes, I did, sir.
What happened the next morning when you got up on the 17th of March?
I received a phone call from General Secord.
Prior to that, did you become aware of a newspaper story about you that had appeared in the press that day?
Yes, yes.
Tell us about that.
I had gotten up at a rather early hour and went out to pick up my paper, and I guess I was blindsided by some video cameraman and a reporter who asked me questions about the security system, and I made some comments, and it subsequent had fairly broad publicity, I'd say, here in Washington.
On the 17th of March, a newspaper story had appeared which alleged that you had paid for the installation of that gate out in front of Colonel North's house, correct?
Yes, sir.
Later that morning, did you get a call from General Secord?
Yes, I did, sir.
What was said in that call?
He commiserated with me about being brought into the arena of publicity. He knows I'm personally a very private person, and that he regretted, just generalities, he regretted that these things had occurred, and suggested that we meet that day for a drink. I told him that I was already seen Colonel North, but I would be downtown if he were downtown, and we agreed to meet later that afternoon for a drink.
Did you go to the luncheon meeting with Colonel North?
Yes, I did.
Did you bring the documents he requested?
Yes, I did.
Tell us what happened.
We met in a conference room. Someone brought in some pre-ordered lunches, and I would say that the luncheon took approximately 40 minutes, half of which, or a quarter of which, was taken with Colonel North on the telephone. At the end of the luncheon, at the end of the 40-minute period, Colonel North asked me if I had the documents. I said yes, and he immediately said, well, let's go see my attorney.
When Colonel North looked at the documents, did he tell you that you should tell the truth to his lawyer about those documents?
No, I don't recall him saying much of anything.
He didn't tell you, you better tell the lawyer the truth about these, did he?
No.
What happened when you took the documents up to meet with the lawyer?
The lawyer, Colonel North brought me in the office. I believe the lawyer got up from his desk. We shook hands. Colonel North left. The lawyer and I had a brief conversation about his office and the building security, because I had, in earlier years, had an office in that same building and was very familiar with the building and some of the security problems about the building. He then asked me if I had brought some documents. I said yes, took them out of my bag, showed them to him. He asked me if he could make a copy. I certainly agreed. He left the office to give the documents to his secretary, found she was not at the desk, told me that he'd be back in a few minutes, that he was going to make copies. He came back shortly after, 5 minutes, gave me my copies back. He had copies in his hands. We sat down. He said, "Did you prepare these documents?" And I said yes. And I believe Colonel North came in shortly thereafter, within a minute or two, said something like, "You guys finished," and which I assume we were, and I left with Colonel North.
Did you tell Colonel North's lawyer that these were phony bills and letters?
No, I didn't.
Did Colonel North tell the lawyer in your presence that they were phony bills and letters?
No, sir, not in my presence.
Did you take back copies of the bills and letters with you?
Yes, I took back what I believe I took down. I can't, copies of copies, I don't know which were which, but I took back what I carried down.
Okay. And from there you went, from Colonel North's office, you went to the meeting with General Secord, correct?
From the lawyer's office.
From the
yes.
lawyer's
Yeah,
office.
and then I walked on over to meet General Secord.
Did Colonel North go with you?
No, he didn't. He remained in that building, I guess. I just said goodbye, and that was it. We passed time about, again, talking about his children. He knows I think a great deal of them. They're rather attractive, and that's really all we talked about in that last 5 minutes.
Tell us what happened in the meeting with General Secord.
I went into the bar. He wasn't there at the time. I think I ordered a drink. He came in shortly thereafter, I'd say 5 to 10 minutes. He seemed to be in a hurry, which is not unusual for General Secord. Asked me how I was, and again commented, sorry about news releases and so forth. Asked me my feelings, state of mind, health, this type of thing. He said, well, you sent bills to Colonel North, didn't you? And I nodded yes, and he said, well, you did the right thing. And I believe we broke shortly thereafter. I don't even think we finished our drinks. He left.
Did you get a call from Colonel North's lawyer later that day?
Yes.
That's Brendan Sullivan, right?
Yes, I carry a beeper, or did carry a beeper.
Let me just clarify one point first. The lawyer you met with at Colonel North's lawyer's office was not Brendan Sullivan. It was one of his partners, wasn't it?
Yeah, I don't know who the lawyer, where he fits in that law firm, but
It wasn't Brendan Sullivan.
It wasn't Brendan Sullivan.
All right. Tell us about the call.
Yes, I believe I was leaving the bar area, and I got a call on my beeper, which is a display beeper showing numbers. I walked back into the hotel, called the number, and the person who answered after I identified myself said, well, Mr. Sullivan wants to talk to you.
Did you call?
Well, I was on the phone, and subsequently he came on. And
what did he say to you?
I think he commented also something about the news media, and I told him that I was extremely upset. I felt that I had a lot of problems, and again, I didn't like being in the limelight. And he made several final comments in which he mentioned three things. The first thing he said was, well, let me tell you, Glenn, don't protect Colonel North. He's a big boy. He can take care of himself. The second thing he told me 3 times was, tell the truth, tell the truth, tell the truth. And the third thing he told me was, I recommend you get an attorney. And all of which sounded rather conclusive to me and threatening, meaning my future. I was concerned. I think there was a silent period of maybe 10 or 20 seconds, and my response to him was, well, thank you very much for calling, and that was it.
Mr. Robinette, did these comments from Mr. Sullivan tell you that the cover story was over?
No way. No, sir.
Well, Mr. Sullivan told you to tell the truth. After that call, have you told the truth to the independent counsel and to these committees?
Yes, I have today, yes.
And have you told the truth to the independent counsel?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Robinette. Mr. Chairman, I have no further questions.
Mr. Bellin?
Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Robinette.
Good morning, Mr. Ballin.
I'd like to examine with you for a moment the letters you testified you received from Colonel North in December 1986.
Yes, sir.
Exhibits 9A and 9B. You have them before you, sir?
Yes, sir, I do.
Turning to Exhibit 9A, the letter dated May 18th from Colonel North, he writes that he has 2 understandings for reimbursing you. One is loan of the equipment for a period not to exceed the expiration of my active service in the United States Marine Corps, at which time we will make our home available for commercial endorsement of your firm and the equipment without fee. Is that the letter he wrote to you, stated that?
Yes, sir.
Sir, as of May 18th, 1986, did your firm, Glenn Robinette and Associates, have an active business installing home security systems?
If I could get a client, I would.
That was not your regular business, home security, was it?
No, sir, but I'm happy to work in that field.
In fact, on this job for Colonel North, isn't it true that you subcontracted the entire installation to others?
Oh, yes, yes. No, I do not have a firm with a crew of workmen who do work. I serve as a consultant, and I consider myself professionally able to do this, to describe, to design systems, and that's why I chose this other firm.
But isn't it true as of May 18th or at any time, sir, you had no home security business that would benefit from any kind of commercial endorsement?
Oh, yes, sir. I'm agreeing with you, sir.
In fact, you have never, if I might understand correctly, supplied equipment free of charge so that some other company would be able to receive a commercial endorsement?
No, I would not provide equipment free of charge.
So this statement in the letter written by Colonel North, given the nature of your business, is simply untrue. Isn't that true?
That's correct, sir.
There's no way it could have been true.
That's correct, sir.
Now, this letter dated May 18th, you stated that you testified, in fact, you received it in December.
That's correct, sir.
And the cost of the equipment, the system as quoted by Colonel North in the letter is from $8,000 to $8,500. Isn't that correct?
That's correct, sir.
Yet on May 19th, you paid the contractor for the security system, VATEC, and I believe it's in Exhibit 3, $6,000 by check.
That's correct, sir.
Is it normal practice in the security business to pay 75% of the price before work has even commenced on a job? Understand my question?
I believe I do, but I don't know what the practice is of the security.
Well, in fact, there's no way you would have paid, if the job were $8,000, there's no way you would have given a $6,000 check to VATEC before they even started work on the system, is it?
If the company, if VATEC had asked for it, I probably would have paid it because we have had a great personal relationship.
But they didn't ask for anything of the sort, did they?
They asked for $6,000.
They didn't ask for 75% down payment?
No, they didn't ask for 75%. They asked for $6,000, and that's what I gave them.
Very good, sir. Now, Mr. Robinette, you testified you received an estimate from VATEC and the electronic gate by at least June of 1986. Would that be correct?
Yes, sir, that's right.
In fact, on July 10th, you testified you paid the final installments on a security system costing some $13,900.
That's correct, Mr. Ballin.
And yet the bill that you sent Colonel North, Exhibit 8A, dated July 2nd, 1986, was only for $8,000. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
Almost $6,000 less than the true cost of the system. Is that true?
Yes, sir.
Now, Mr. Robinette, when you sent these two bills, dated July 2nd and September 22nd, to Colonel North, Exhibits 8A and 8B, for the security system, you never expected payment, did you?
No, sir.
And the methods for payment that Colonel North had outlined in his letters to you, which we just went through, the loan of the equipment for your commercial endorsement, these letters he sent back to you and the methods of payment he outlined to you were equally false, just as your bills were they not?
Yes, sir. I don't recall discussing that with them.
Now, when you sent these phony bills, did you know at the time it was a federal crime for an employee of the United States government to receive any form of compensation for his services other than his salary?
I don't think it occurred to me at that time, sir.
Well, what other reason then did you have for falsifying the documents if you didn't know it was a crime, the receipt of this money by Colonel North, this benefit?
Well, I've given some thought to that since that occurrence, and I think I'll comment again on what I said earlier. I think I led with my heart instead of my head. Colonel North was, as I said earlier, right in the middle of major problems. Here was someone that I had only met slightly, but I thought was an extremely dedicated, intense man, dedicated not only to the country, but to his family. And I must admit, his family impressed me greatly. I thought Mrs. North was a lovely lady and greatly devoted to her family. And I liked the children very much. And to repeat again, I think my response was one based on emotion rather than cold, hard business sense.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Robinette.
Thank you, Mr. Ballin.
Mr. Van Cleve?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Robinette.
Good morning, Mr. Van Cleve.
Morning, Council. Mr. Robinette, you met on May 5th and May 10th, 1986 with General Secord and Colonel North to discuss the installation of the security system in his home. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And I believe you testified this morning that at some point in those meetings, Colonel North mentioned specifically that he believed that he or his family were the subject of terrorist threats. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And did he specifically mention to you the name of Abu Nidal?
Yes, sir. That sticks in my memory.
And this would have been just after the United States bombing of Libya. Is that correct? That occurred in April 1986.
Yes, sir.
Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And did Colonel North tell you that there had been guards posted at his home at that period of time?
Yes, he commented that at some time previous to our discussion that there had been 2 guards, I believe, staying in his garage.
They were staying in his garage, is that correct?
That was the recollection that I have of the conversation, that at some time earlier, 2 guards had been living in his garage.
And did he comment to you on whether that was a satisfactory arrangement for his family or not?
Yes, he did comment.
And what did he say?
He said it was an unsatisfactory arrangement because it had caused disruptions to his family's lifestyle.
Now, with respect to the security system that you installed, you designed that system, correct?
Yes, sir.
And Colonel North approved the specifications that you suggested to him, correct?
He approved the operational concept of what it was to do and how it was to operate.
Now, that system would provide a substantial amount of protection against the kind of vandalism that Mrs. North and Colonel North had described to you that had been occurring at their home. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And it would also provide, would it not, a deterrent to terrorist attacks?
Yes, sir.
And a warning, a substantial warning system against such attacks.
I think so, sir. Yes, sir.
And within the limits of the resources of a private individual, such as Colonel North and his family, the system would provide probably as much protection as could be provided against those kinds of attacks, correct?
I think that's quite correct, sir.
I'd ask you now to turn to Exhibit 9B, please. The first paragraph of 9B states, "Dear Glenn, please forgive me for not getting back to you sooner. I've been out of town and we seem to keep missing each other on phone calls." Now, is it a fact that on or around the 1st of October 1986, you and Colonel North had been exchanging phone calls about the security system?
Not to my recollection, sir.
Okay. Now, in the third paragraph of the letter, the last sentence states, "While we are very pleased with the system and the fact that it, quote, came in under estimate, unquote, we just don't have $8,000 without borrowing it. And with Stewart in school and Tate going next year, that is a real problem." Did you ever tell Colonel North that the system had come in under estimate?
No, sir. I never used that word, or that phrase.
Did you ever tell Colonel North that the system had cost more than $8,000 to install?
No, sir. I never did.
To your knowledge, was Colonel North ever told what the system cost to install?
I don't know.
At any time prior to, well, let me rephrase that. Did you ever become aware that at any time prior to November 25th, 1986, Colonel North and General Secord had made an arrangement for North to either pay or repay the cost for the security system?
No, sir. I've never heard such conversation, or nor am I aware of any arrangements. for
Okay,
that.
let me ask you a similar but somewhat
Yes.
different question.
Yes, sir.
To your knowledge, did General Secord ever tell North that he, Secord, had paid you for all of the installation costs of the security system?
Not to my knowledge, sir.
When Colonel North called you in December 1986 and asked you for a bill, did you tell him that General Secord had already paid for the system?
No, sir, I did not.
Why not?
It didn't occur to me at that time, sir.
Well, let me see if I understand your answer. Colonel North calls up and asks you to send him a bill for a security system that you know cost $14,000,
Correct, sir.
and you know it's already been paid for according to your testimony. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And if I understand you correctly, you don't mention a word to him about the fact that the system has been paid for?
That's correct, sir.
And my question was, why not?
My interpretation, my feeling, was that he needed some assistance, and he wanted bills, some documents. And as I've commented earlier, my reaction to that was to try to be helpful. I don't think the subject of whether the system was paid or not paid for even came into my mind at that time.
I have two final questions, Mr. Robinette.
Yes, sir.
You've testified earlier that you paid your own funds, or at least funds that were in your custody,
Yes,
that
sir.
is cash,
Yes, sir.
for both the down payment and the final payments on the security system. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
And you've testified further that you received reimbursement from General Secord, first in cash and then in the form of a check. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
Do you have any other documentation that would go to support your claim that the payments you received from General Secord were in fact reimbursement for those payments?
No, sir.
Okay. Now, prior to your testimony here today, have you discussed your testimony with General Secord?
No, sir.
Have you discussed at any time your decision to seek immunity with General Secord?
No, sir.
Have you discussed your testimony with Colonel North?
No, sir.
Have you discussed your decision to seek immunity with Colonel North?
No, sir.
Have you discussed your testimony with Mr. Kleins?
No, sir.
Have you discussed your decision to seek immunity with Mr. Kleins?
No, sir.
No further questions, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, may I have a moment?
Please.
Mr. Chairman, may we have permission to have Mr. Barbadaro clarify one point that he made in response to Mr. Barbadaro's question, and the point specifically, and I'm not going to testify, obviously, the point is, and I think it really needs to be clarified so that someone is not unfairly characterized, and the statement that needs to be clarified is the word that Mr. Robinette used, threatening his state of mind after Mr. Sullivan's call. I mean, I've discussed this with Mr. Sullivan. I think Mr. Robinette may have given an impression that's not accurate, and he'd like to clarify it. May he do so, sir?
Please do.
Thank you. Thank you. In using the word threatening regarding that phone call, in no way do I mean to imply at any time that Mr. Sullivan was making a threat to me. The threatening to me was one of my own feelings that what have I gotten myself into, a personal observation. No way at any time did Mr. Sullivan ever make any threatening statements to me.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Barbadaro, would you care to follow?
Mr. Chairman, to say that, and I did not mean to suggest in any of my questions that you were in any way threatened by Mr. Sullivan.
Never.
We accept that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Boren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Robinette, I believe
Yes,
you
sir.
testified that at one time, for a brief period, you were employed by a company known as EATSCO. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
And when was that?
I believe it was September 81 to January 82. This is recollection.
Right. And was Mr. Kleins one of the owners of EATSCO?
I don't know if he was an owner, but he certainly was a principal working there.
He was a principal involved, and I
He was one of the principals. There were two, to my recollection.
believe the other was an Egyptian named Salam, was that right?
Yes, sir. That's correct.
And the court records would indicate that Mr. Kleins was a 49% owner in the company.
Yeah, I don't know that, but I'm sure the court records are correct.
Are you aware that EATSCO and its president, Mr. Salam, pleaded guilty to criminal charges for submitting fraudulent billings to the U.S. government?
Yes, I read that in the news media, sir.
Are you aware that in February 1984, Mr. Kleins, through one of his corporations, paid a $100,000 fine in connection with the EATSCO matter?
Yes, sir, I'm aware of that.
Now, I'd call your attention to Exhibit 10, which is in front of you. It is a receipt, indicates it is a receipt for a $33,000 cashier's check, which you allegedly received from General Secord in February of 1984. Have you seen that receipt before?
It was shown to me recently. About 3 weeks ago, a reporter called me up and said that the government had it as evidence, and the reporter wanted to ask me questions about it.
Does that appear to be a receipt which you issued and which you signed for?
Yes, sir. I wrote the receipt.
You wrote the receipt?
Yeah, and gave this to General Secord.
You gave this receipt to General Secord?
Yes, sir.
Now, the receipt said that the check you received was made out to Tom Kleins. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And how did you come to receive this $33,000 check?
Sometime prior to this date, a week or two, I can't recall, back 84, February of 84, but Mr. Kleins called me or told me that Mr. Kleins, was going to be away for a week or two, and that he had made prior arrangements with General Secord to obtain a loan of $34,000, and would I be kind enough to pick it up and put it in a bank that Mr. Kleins identified with a lady's name and so forth.
Who was to receive it at the bank?
Who was to receive it at the bank.
Now where did you receive this check?
I called General Secord up, telling him that I was going to pick up the check. I didn't know General Secord well at that time. It had only been social meetings. And we met on the parking lot of the bank where Mr. Kleins had his account in Virginia.
And what happened when you met with General Secord there in the parking lot?
General Secord gave me a check for $33,000, which was kind of surprising because I'd handwritten a note in case he wanted a receipt. I didn't think he would, but as you can see, I made a change to $33,000 and then initialed it. At that time, General Secord said, yes, he wanted a receipt. So I subsequently gave it to him, and he left, and I went into the bank, met with the woman whose name Mr. Kleins had given me, and gave her the check and for deposit in Mr. Kleins' account.
Did you have any conversation with General Secord at the time you met with him, other than just his asking for the receipt and you're providing it?
That's about it. He asked me, when do you think I'm going to get paid? And I don't know when he was going to get paid. I don't know what it was about.
Could General Secord have walked into the bank himself and done the same thing you did? In other words, you're meeting out in this parking lot, he's giving you a check. All you did with the check was walk into the bank and hand it to this particular individual and walk back out. Couldn't General Secord have done that himself?
I think he could have, and this question has come up earlier. I think what Mr. Klein's motive was, or purpose was, to have me ramrod it, have me have him give it to me that he was under, and actually do it. That I think he felt more comfortable with having the money loaned as agreed upon under those circumstances.
But he didn't explain to you in detail why he wanted you. Mr. Kleins didn't.
No, sir, he did not.
Mr. Edwin Wilson has alleged that this check was used by Mr. Kleins to pay a portion of his fine, the $100,000, which was also paid in February, paid in the same month to the U.S. government in the Eatsco case. Do you have any evidence to support this allegation that this might have been a 1/3 share of the fine that Mr. Kleins paid in that case?
No, sir, I have no evidence.
Let me turn your attention to an article that appeared in the Washington Post on 6/12/87 in regard to the security equipment which has been discussed earlier that was installed at the North home. Now, you've testified that you were reimbursed by General Secord in amounts of $7,000 and $9,000, total of $16,000.
That's correct, sir.
And that General Secord obviously knew that you were installing this equipment and had installed it, and that he approved of your doing so.
I believe so, sir. Yes, sir.
In fact, you testified he also approved even of your sending the bills after the fact, these documents to Colonel North.
He didn't he didn't comment in many words. I just simply told him that I had sent these and also received the other correspondence. But
I believe you said he said something like, "We've done the right thing."
oh yes, subsequently yes. But when I had done it in December, I had commented to him, and there was very little response from him.
Well, let me go back to this article in the Washington Post, which I mentioned, and quote from it. And I'd like to ask you, I'll quote from it part by part. It quotes General Secord as saying the following. Secord said the money for the system came from the guy who put it in. I assume that would be you.
That's me, sir.
And I gather that that's not true in the ultimate sense that you were fully reimbursed.
I feel I was, sir.
He says, without any blessing from me. Now, is it true that you did this without any blessing or implication that General Secord approved?
I think that's a fair statement. I've never heard General Secord at any time ever say, I will, meaning I'm quoting General Secord, that he will pay for the system.
But he paid you for it?
Yes, sir, but I've never heard him say it.
Wouldn't you think that's pretty important that he did pay you $16,000? Doesn't that indicate that he didn't disapprove of your putting it in?
Of course, sir.
He says, without any financial assistance from me. Let me read this statement again. The money for the system came from the guy who put it in without any blessing from me and without any financial assistance from me. That's not true, is it?
No, I was reimbursed for the system.
We had nothing to do with it, he said. So there was a reimbursement, there was discussion of it, attendance in some meetings, so that would also be untrue, would it not?
I feel so, sir.
Let me turn to your relationship with Colonel North and what has been called Project Democracy, the supply operation in Central America. Are you aware of the fact that on July 25th, 1986, Colonel North wrote a memorandum which has since been declassified to Admiral Poindexter discussing your contacts with a certain individual, and that this memo referred to you as the security officer for Project Democracy. Are you aware of that?
I just heard of it this week, sir.
Were you the security officer for Project Democracy?
No, sir, I've never heard of Project Democracy until until it came out in the news media. I don't know what it is, even today.
Were you involved in that operation in any way?
I don't know, sir. I don't know anything about Project Democracy. I don't know anything about it.
Have you had frequent conversations in the past with Rob Owen?
Yes, sir.
What was the nature of these conversations?
Rob Owen is one of the defendants in this civil suit, along with about 28 other people. And
this is a civil suit in Costa Rica?
Yes, it is. That General Secord had asked me to provide some assistance. And Rob Owen was a name that was given to me by General Secord as a suggested source of information who could help in background preparation for this civil suit.
What about with Mr. Quintero? Have you had frequent conversations with Mr. Quintero?
I don't, yes, I know Mr. Quintero. I might have talked to him a little bit about it, but during 1986, I don't recall anything specific. I'm sure I mentioned it to him because he's another defendant and someone I consider extremely intelligent and alert to the kind of thing that I was trying to build up.
From these conversations, were you not aware of the fact that there was a rather large-scale supply operation going on to provide supplies to the Contras?
No, sir, I was not aware of that.
You were not aware
No.
that there was a supply operation going on?
No, sir. I did not know anything about Rob Owens or Quintero's activities prior to my conversations with him.
You mentioned that General Secord had hired you to find out information about the people who were making allegations against him and some of his associates in regard to the Central American operation. What kind of things did he ask you to do?
Well, he would give me the name of individuals who he had learned were making allegations and would say to me that he didn't even know them, as an example, and what is the basis for them saying it, and where do they fit in this picture, and who are they?
And I gather from conversations that you had with our staff that he wanted you to also find out unfavorable information about any of these individuals that might have been making accusations.
Something that ultimately I would put together and be given to him and to General Secord's attorney for subsequent use in a lawsuit.
Did you use the informal term that he wanted you to find out any dirt about them, or that you were trying to find out any dirt about them if you could?
Well, I use derogatory, but dirt is...
Did you sometimes make payments for or pay compensation for information about people which you were able to obtain?
Yes, sir.
I have no further questions, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Jenkins?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Robinette, just a few brief questions, if I may. You frequently visited the office of General Secord during 1985-86?
86, sir.
And those visits were quite frequent, I assume.
I try to do it at least once a week or twice a week, yes.
And during those visits, you would occasionally see Mr. Hakim there at the offices?
Occasionally I saw him. Seemed to me I saw him there toward the middle of 86, but he wasn't there very much.
Occasionally, I believe I read in one of your statements that you talked about going into some business, maybe?
With Mr. Hakim?
Yes.
No.
You did not. When you retired from the CIA in 1971...
Yes, sir.
In about 1975 or 76,
Yes,
you
sir.
had some export business, did you not?
Could you clarify that, sir?
Well, with a Mr. Gunnell?
No, sir, that doesn't sound familiar, but I know Mr. Gunnell. Export?
You didn't have any, engage in any export business at all with,
Mr. Gunnell? No, sir.
what about Mr. Wilson?
No, sir. I've never been in business with Mr. Wilson.
Never had any business relationship whatsoever with him?
No, sir.
I noticed in your statement that you had been to Libya. What year was that?
I think between 1975 and 1980, it's, yes, sir.
You saw Mr. Wilson there?
Yeah, on one occasion, I was in the airport, and as you know, Mr. Wilson is a rather large man, and I saw him over the other side of the area where luggage was being received. It appeared that he was meeting someone coming on a domestic flight, which I assumed to be Benghazi. I had just gotten off a flight, an international flight. I saw him, and I moved back behind a large pillar so he didn't see me.
Why did you not want Mr. Wilson to see you?
Well, Libya is a very small country, and as far as business activities, and I think there's a great deal of competition, and everyone knows when someone else is in the country. I felt I had a project that I was committed in, and I didn't want anyone participating in my project, and period.
So you were there on a private business?
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I'd ask if Congressman Jenkins would be kind enough to allow Mr. Robinette to explain why I was there. Given the rather sensitive nature of our relations with Libya, I'd like the record clear why he was there, so there isn't any speculation on that, if you don't mind.
Certainly.
Certainly.
Explain.
Certainly. I was working with a company who had been contacted by another organization in Texas. The organization in Texas was involved in oil activities in Libya. This is a U.S. company, of course. And they had heard that the government of Libya was quite interested in modernizing their police department. They wanted it to be like, as an example, Saudi Arabia. And one of the points that stuck out of my mind is they wanted police cars with flashing lights and loud sirens. In any case, they wanted to modernize the police department, and the company in Texas asked the company that I was working with if we would support that request, and in turn I was selected and made a number of trips out to Tripoli.
At any rate, you did not talk to Mr. Wilson at that time?
No, sir.
All right.
No, sir.
During your visits to General Secord's office, you were paid for your services for him in the private lawsuit. Were you paid in cash, that $4,000 a month?
No, the payments were not regular. If anything, they were irregular, but they were accurate. And the reason they were irregular was not because of anything, but simply I can attribute to a lack of availability of General Secord. He was not around very much. I usually tried to call ahead of time, but it was not unusual if I called, and then the girl said he would be there, I'd go out there and he wasn't there.
All right, I understand that. So you would go by when you could locate him, and if he owed
Yes,
you
sir.
$8,000 or $9,000, he would pay you. Would he pay you in cash?
Yes, sir.
And he would just go to that drawer and open it up and give you $100 bills or $20 bills or what?
It would be wrapped or with rubber bands or paper. Now, I don't know whether it all came out of a drawer. I say he would lean down. He might be.
Well, it was coming from the same source every time?
That's right. Or it might be a attaché case on his piece of...
$100 bills generally?
I can't accurately recall. There's certainly $100 bills there, yeah.
All right. You were not ever asked to cash any checks in behalf of General Secord, traveler's checks or any other checks?
No, sir.
Into cash, were you?
No, sir, never.
Let me ask you just briefly, and I think I understand the telephone call from Colonel North before you sent the two bills to him that you've already testified to. You indicated to counsel that you didn't say anything to him at the time, that Colonel, your bill's already paid, which seems a bit unusual to me, unless both you and Colonel North, of course, knew that the bill had already been paid. Isn't that the only possible reason that you wouldn't say something to him?
I don't know what Colonel North's thinking was at that time, but I felt that with the unfavorable publicity regarding Colonel North, that he had a motive in mind, when he called me. And my response, as I say, might have been one of emotion or heart, but I did it.
Well, I understand you did it, but what I'm trying to get to, you not only sent him a bill, you sent him 2 bills to make it appear that you had been done in him on more than one occasion. Why did you decide to send him 2 bills if you had not discussed it with Colonel North?
My own idea. Nothing, no discussions with Colonel North or General Secord. I simply did it at that time, as I think I commented earlier, reflecting the one in July when the installation was complete, and the one in September when I felt that the installation was operating satisfactorily. Because of that period between July and September, there had been some malfunctions.
Well, I can understand if he had been sent a bill and he called you and told you that he had lost his bill and he needed to reconstruct this, so he'd like to have copies of those bills. But he didn't do that because you'd never sent him a bill anyway.
That's correct,
You'd
sir.
already been paid.
That's correct, sir.
No reason to send a bill.
Correct, sir.
And you didn't, the only reason you didn't discuss money, obviously, discuss the fact that you had been paid, which is hard for a lot of people, including myself, to understand, is that you knew that Colonel North knew that you'd already been paid. Isn't that correct?
I can't say that as a true, sir. I don't know that Colonel North knew that.
What is your opinion?
I have no idea, sir. I only know that I had been paid and that I responded to Colonel North's request.
And when you got the 2 letters back from Colonel North in the same envelope,
Yes,
dated
sir.
on 6 months and 3 months previously,
Yes, sir.
you looked at those letters and decided at that time that this was simply a construction of a record for Colonel North. Is that correct?
I don't know what his intent was. It came as a surprise to me. I didn't think it was necessary, but
Well, are you aware of the fact that there is a statute that prevents a federal employee from receiving a supplemental, any salary from a private source for services that he has rendered?
no, I'm not personally aware of that.
Well, why do you think Colonel North was trying to establish that he had paid for this $16,000 operation?
I don't know
himself?
what his motive was, sir. He simply asked me to respond, and I did. I don't know what his motive was.
I have no idea what his motive was.
No, sir. He never said anything more than what I've testified here.
But after you had performed accordingly, General Secord said that you had done the right thing, and Colonel North's attorney said that you ought to get an attorney.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Hyde?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir.
Let me see if I can get a fix on where we are now.
Yes, sir.
Now, apparently, the law, as we've been told by counsel and others, is that a military person, a lieutenant colonel in the Marine Corps, is supposed to live on his salary and not accept gratuities, gifts, emoluments from other sources. The salary is it, and apparently, if Colonel North accepted a $13,900 gift from Secord or anybody else, we got him. He's broken the law, the federal law, and we are beginning to zero in on Colonel North. So I think that's where we are, and that's as I interpret it. Now, this wasn't a Porsche or a couple of Rolexes or a private plane. This was a security system around Colonel North's home. Is that correct, Mr. Robinette?
That's correct, sir.
How many children does Colonel North have?
He has 4 lovely children.
What are their ages, approximately?
I'm going to say one now must be around 17, and the youngest is a little girl about 5, 6.
5 or 6,
Yes, sir.
17, and then scattered in between,
Yeah,
huh?
I don't actually recall her age.
All right. And what's the salary of a lieutenant colonel? Do you know?
No, sir, I have no idea.
Now, Colonel North's work at the National Security Council involved dealing with the terrorist problem around the world. Is that not so? Were you aware of that?
I was not fully aware of that, but I've subsequently learned about it in some of these
You
hearings.
followed the press accounts of Colonel
Yes, sir.
North, and you've learned that terrorism was one of his assignments.
Yes, sir.
Also hostages. Have you learned that he was directly involved in the hostage problem in the Middle East? Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And you've also learned that he was involved in the Central American policy of assisting the democratic resistance down there. That was one of his concerns and assignments.
Yes,
Is that correct?
Yes, sir, it is, sir.
Mr. Robinette, have you ever received a threat over the telephone from some anonymous person?
I've gotten some, I don't know if it's a threatening phone call, but since I've participated in this activity in March, I've gotten several phone calls that I would consider not complimentary.
Well, we often ask witnesses at these hearings to conjecture as to somebody else's state of mind. We do that regularly. So I'm going to indulge myself, since the rules of evidence don't apply here. We have figuratively shredded them. Let me ask you, Mr. Robinette, can you imagine or speculate, since you spent a career in the CIA dealing with matters of security, what a woman with 4 kids home alone, what her state of mind might be when the telephone rings and she gets a threatening phone call? Can you imagine what her state of mind might be?
I can only relate it to Mrs. North, and she impressed me as someone extremely concerned about her husband and her family. And she was alone a great deal. She didn't make any complaints to me, but she certainly seemed like a lovely lady, an excellent mother, and
well, I understand that. It's the state of mind when you got 4 kids in the house,
exactly.
And you get threatening phone calls. What about flashing lights? It's nighttime. Your husband's not around. You got kids in the house, and somebody out there in the boondocks is flashing lights into your window. That could be harassment, as counsel said. Just like puncturing the tires could be harassment, or pouring sand into the gas could be harassment, or leaving packages with garbage in them at the mailbox could be harassment. It'd be pretty damn scary too, couldn't it?
Yes, sir, very much so.
How do you puncture a tire? You take an ice pick, or you take a hatchet or something like that? Is that how tires get punctured?
Yes, sir.
Now, Colonel North, by the way, Mr. Robinette, are you aware that the Naval Investigative Service is providing protective services to Colonel North and his family?
Yes, the news reporters called me up shortly after they went out there and asked me if I knew anything about it.
Are you aware that threats have been received by Colonel North that are judged to be credible threats by the Naval Investigative Service?
No, sir, I don't know anything about that.
Are you aware that his family was once moved to a military base because of threats?
No, sir.
You're not aware of that?
No, sir.
Now, while these threats are in progress to this man and his family, and he's not home an awful lot, I guess one could say the need for a security system around his home was immediate. That would be Colonel North, that would be anybody's state of mind who had to endure a situation like that, correct?
I agree, sir.
And of course, the availability of the funds to install such a security system might not be so immediate. You're unaware, as I am, but you're unaware of whether or not General Secord and Colonel North had any arrangement between themselves concerning the financing of this.
I know nothing about anything.
All right. And this was a home, you said, not a military base that you were putting security
A
around?
typical home with children.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Mr. Chairman, would it be permissible for Mr. Robinette to use the facilities?
We'll take a short recess for 5 minutes.
Thank you, sir.
Very good. How's it? What's the problem, sir?
Senator Tribble.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Robinette.
Good morning.
Good morning. Mr. Robinette, I'd like to first briefly pursue some of your earlier remarks. Now, you were employed by the CIA for many years, were you not?
Yes, sir.
Do you believe that a person is free to violate the law because he lives on a government salary?
No, sir.
You weren't trying to suggest, were you, that because someone lives on a lieutenant colonel's salary that they can violate the law?
No, sir.
Did Mr. North, if endangered, have a right to secure government protection?
Would you repeat that, sir? I'm sorry,
Yes.
I missed it.
If Colonel North was endangered, or the safety of his family, did he have a right to call on the government for protection?
I think he would, sir.
And the fact is that he had received government protection, according to your testimony.
He had, yes, sir.
And that's paid for by the taxpayers and by the government?
I assume so, sir.
And that's a correct way of doing business, is it not?
Yes, sir.
Now let me turn to another matter and talk about your relationship with Mr. Secord.
Yes, sir.
In 1986, you received over $30,000 in cash from Mr. Secord for your investigative work and also for the security work. Is that true?
Yes, sir.
Now, that seems like a lot of cash to me. Did you normally receive payments in cash from your other clients?
Never, sir.
Never. Well, now, what did you do normally when you received this cash? Did you deposit it to your bank account?
I might, sir, but generally I just kept it in a secure container.
You kept it where, sir?
In a secure container
And where was that container?
in my home.
In your home?
Yes, sir.
So you didn't deposit it in the bank, you kept it at home.
Yes, sir.
Now, when you received this cash, did you sign a receipt for the cash payments?
No, sir.
Did you keep any record of the cash payments that you received from General Secord?
No, sir.
Did General Secord give you a tax statement at the end of the year?
No, sir.
Have you reported that income
Yes, sir.
in 1986?
86. I filed a request for an extension of payment, but it's reported accurately.
All right, sir. And when did you file that statement?
Sometime in 1987, early 87.
Now, you reported in your earlier testimony that in December of 1986, you talked to General Secord, and you reported to him then that you had sent bills to North and that you had received letters back. Is that
Yes,
correct?
sir. That's correct, sir.
Now, what was his reaction to that statement?
He was non-committal. He just simply said, "That's good, fine."
Now, didn't he express surprise in view of the fact that he had paid in full for these services?
No, I don't recall him expressing surprise or showing surprise.
Did he indicate to you that you'd done something wrong?
No, sir.
Now, isn't it a fact, Mr. Robinette, that these bills that you sent, the exchange of correspondence, was intended not just to protect Lieutenant Colonel North, but also General Secord as well?
I think that's a fair comment to say, sir. I think my principal objective, my point was to help Colonel North, but it's certainly true that it would assist General Secord.
Now, you reported further that on March 17th, you had lunch with Colonel North and then drinks following lunch with General Secord.
That's correct, sir.
Now, at that time, again, there was a brief discussion about the exchange of correspondence
Yes, sir.
with Lieutenant Colonel North. Tell us again what was said there by General Secord, and what did you say?
In the bar, then, yeah. It was a very brief meeting. As I commented earlier, General Secord appeared to be in a hurry and came in and commiserated with me about the publicity. I think that was most of the conversation, if I were to lump it together. And then, as sort of a closing remark, or a brief remark, he simply said, well, you sent bills, didn't you? That's good.
Now, earlier you indicated he also said that you had done the right thing.
Yes, yes. That's correct, sir.
Now, Mr. Robinette, do you believe today that you did the right thing here?
In sending the bills to Colonel North? No, I wouldn't be sitting here if I...
You indicated that you had led from the heart
Yes,
in
sir.
responding as you did.
Yes, sir.
Because of your concern about the North family and your affection for the family.
Yes, sir.
Isn't it true, though, that you had to use your brain in order to undertake this enterprise? That it was a rather well-orchestrated effort to conceal the truth, to mislead the authorities, to protect Colonel North and General Secord?
Well, yes, I was the one who sent the documents, yes.
So it really was more than just a sympathetic response. I mean, isn't it true that here we have action calculated to deceive?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
You're an old hand at the CIA. You knew what you were doing, did you not?
It was done, yes, I do, but as I said earlier, to have someone like Colonel North call me, and knowing that he was under extreme pressures, publicity, bad publicity, I guess I felt some personal concern for him.
Mr. Robinette, I thank you for your testimony. I think you have been very straightforward today. I would simply observe that the evidence here establishes that a government official received a substantial gratuity to which he was not entitled, that the gratuity was paid at least in part from funds generated by the sale of arms to Iran, and that you and Colonel North and General Secord endeavored to mislead and to cover your tracks. It's troubling, I know, to all of us that we have to be here today, to you and to your family. What we see here, it seems, is a confusion of the public interest and the private interest. And all this demonstrates once again the corrosive and corrupting effect of generating operations without checks and balances. I thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Robinette, in response to earlier questions this morning, you talked about the security needs of Colonel North's family. You were asked about his wife and children. May I ask you, how did it protect the physical security needs of Colonel North's family for you to prepare those phony bills?
I don't think that provided any physical protection to them.
Right. And how did it protect the physical security of Colonel North's family for him to prepare those phony letters in response to those phony bills?
I don't think there was any protection there.
They had nothing to do with that, did they?
No, sir.
Right. Now, when you were originally contacted by this committee and the independent counsel,
Yes, sir.
you refused to answer questions on the ground that your testimony might incriminate you. And then after you were granted immunity and your testimony compelled, you have answered questions from the council and this committee. And here today, you've answered fully, and you said in response to several questions that with respect to some of your actions, you led with your heart, not your head.
Yes, sir.
From that, we learned that you now realize you did something wrong. And my question is how you felt about your actions at the time they occurred as opposed to the present. Now, you had been a government employee for many years. You knew, didn't you, that it is illegal for a public official to receive anything of value for or because of any official act performed by that government official?
Yes,
didn't
sir.
you?
Yes, sir.
You knew that. And you knew it was wrong to prepare those phony bills, didn't you?
Yes, sir.
Right. The purpose of those phony bills was to cover up what you were aware was at least wrong and possibly illegal.
That's correct, sir.
Right. And that, and the, as you said earlier, the preparation of those documents, the elaborate predating, the letters by Colonel North, which fabricated 2 option payments which had never been discussed, those had nothing to do with the physical security of Colonel North's family, did they?
No, sir.
And they were entirely directed toward creating a false and misleading impression as to actions that were wrong. Isn't that correct?
That's correct, sir.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Robinette. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Rodino.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have just 2 questions,
Yes,
Mr. Robinette. Along the same lines you've been now responding to the previous members of this panel. When you received those letters from Colonel North representing the various options which he said would be a method of payment and suggesting that you should send him bills, did you call him back to tell him that you'd been paid? Did you ask him why he wanted those bills sent to him?
No, sir, I did not, sir.
Didn't you think you had an obligation to?
An obligation to tell him, sir?
Yes.
No, he called. It was my understanding or my feeling that at that time when he called me, he had a reason in mind.
Well, I know, but you knew that you had already been paid, and I don't like to rehash this, but you've got to be, Mr. Robinette, as truthful as you're trying to be now. I think that you've got to recognize that you failed at that time, having received those requests from him, to even make an inquiry of him, to ask him, why do you want this? You know that if I do send you a bill at this time, I'm going to be misleading whoever is going to be inquiring about this matter, yet you failed to do so. Isn't that correct?
Yes, sir.
I mean, you failed to do so because you say, as a matter of heart again, you felt sorry for him, but you knew that this was, in effect, actually, not only a misrepresentation, a false statement that you then were going to be entering into. Isn't that correct?
Yes, sir.
And yet you did so.
Yes, sir.
To protect him.
Yes, to help and assist him and to protect him.
Well, I mean, help and assist. Let's be honest. You knew that something was wrong. And you deliberately then decided that these letters would serve, whether you want to describe it as a cover, but serve as a cover, as a means of protecting whether Colonel North or Mr. Secord or whoever. Isn't that correct?
That's correct, sir.
I think it's about time that the witnesses who come before this committee, while they represent that they come here, and most of them under a grant of immunity before this committee, don't dissemble when they do come, and at least in response to the questions, as difficult as it may be, to tell the truth. Tell the truth. It seems to me that what we're confronted with in this whole process of examination is to try to get at the truth, because so much that has gone on has been a dissembling, an attempt to mislead the Congress, mislead the people. And I know that maybe I shouldn't be speechifying in this manner, but it seems to me that, very frankly, Mr. Robinette, you along with the others who have been involved, at this time, recognizing that this committee has offered itself, has offered you and others the opportunity to appear before this committee and on occasion be immunized, that the least that you can do is to attempt to help the committee and try to get at the truth, because otherwise this is going to be an exercise in futility. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, with great personal respect for Chairman Rodino, my client has testified no fewer than 6 times in response to questions that he has that his purpose was to protect Colonel North, and I object to a characterization of my client not telling the truth. My client's been very candid with this committee and will continue to be.
Your objection is noted, sir. Senator Corn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Robinette.
Yes, sir.
Bill, could you move?
Yes,
Excuse me
sir.
1 second.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. How many times did you actually meet with Colonel North during from the period of time that you first discussed the security system and its actual conclusion with respect to the sending of the letters to Oliver North?
I would guess twice, sir.
And both of those occasions were quite brief, were they not?
Very brief, sir.
He's a busy man. You said, I think, maybe 5 minutes maximum at the time you met with him?
Yes, sir.
And yet you felt an immediate kinship toward Oliver North because he was involved in serious-minded matters, right?
Yes, the meetings were brief, but as I think everyone will find out, Colonel North has a great deal of magnetism, and I think he's...
Well, I think it's clear that you're not the only person to fall under the spell of
Yes,
Colonel North. We have Albert Hakim, as a matter of fact,
Yes,
who spent a very brief time with Colonel North, and yet he also felt a sincere obligation to protect his family, not in a security sense, but in a financial sense. So you're not the only gentleman to have fallen under the spell of Oliver North. But I would just point out that while you've indicated that you yielded to passion rather than to principle, your heart instead of your head, submitting false bills, false statements, and indeed false amounts. You didn't even indicate the true amount that was required because
Correct.
you put $8,000
Correct.
to correspond with the initial statement that he made. You blamed yourself for the delay in submitting the bill, so you proposed a ready-made excuse for Oliver North in your own letter, did you not?
Yes, sir.
Let me ask you whether or not it was a case not only of concern for Oliver North's family, which you are fond of, but also being indebted to General Secord?
I think there's some truth in that, certainly, sir.
Because after all, he is providing you, or was providing you, with a major source of income to your company, was he not?
Certainly was, sir.
It was $4,000 a month. I think you indicated in previous testimony before the committee that generally you took in about $7,000 through the company?
Yes, sir.
Without General Secord. So he was a major benefactor to your company as such.
A principal, yes, sir.
Principal benefactor.
Yes, sir.
And I assume that you wanted to protect that relationship as well when you decided to phony up the bills and the statements, that was a relationship that you had very much in mind as well.
Yeah, I commented earlier that I think my response was immediate to Colonel North,
Right.
because that was what was in my mind, but I'm sure there was some subliminal desire to protect General Secord, too.
That not only protect him, but to continue your relationship with him.
Of course.
On a business sense.
Of course.
Certainly General Secord is in a position to continue to supply you with business, indeed as he did in asking you to perform certain investigative functions.
Yes, sir.
I noticed, Mr. Robinette, that there is a dramatic difference in tone and substance in the letter dated May 18, 86, addressed to you, and the letter dated October 1st, 86. Did you happen to catch that when you first read these?
May I just glance at it?
Please. If I could just call your attention to it as you're reading
Yes,
it,
go
I
ahead,
will go through and point
Yes,
out
sir.
several things that stood out to me. The first letter, and by the way, you received both of these documents in the same package, did you not?
Yes, sir.
At the same time.
Yes, sir.
The first letter, May 18, strikes me as being very formal. It's very legalistic in its form. It's very structured. It uses, in addition to being false, but it uses words like aforementioned, letter, indication of intent, very legalistic terms. It's signed sincerely, Oliver L. North, the full name spelled out. And then the second letter, which is received the same day, dated October 1st, 86, some 6 months later, it says, Dear Glenn. Now, there is a dramatic informality about this relationship. In fact, you only met the man twice, but now you're no longer Mr. Robinette. You are now Dear Glenn. And it talks about Betsy and Stuart and the girls and
Yes,
Tate.
sir.
And we have some broken E's and warm regards and signed Ollie. How do you account for the difference in the tone and substance of that?
I don't know, sir.
Mr. Robinette, you were in the CIA for some 20 years?
Yes, sir.
Technical services?
Yes, sir.
And part of the technical services would be to establish forged documents. That's part of it.
That's a fair comment, sir.
Right. And that's just a small part of it, I might add.
Yes, sir.
Right?
Yes, sir.
And didn't it strike you on the very face of this, this was an attempt, a deliberate attempt to simulate a different time for the drafting of these letters?
It probably occurred to me, sir.
No further questions.
Carter. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Robinette.
Yes, sir.
You testified earlier, Mr. Robinette, about the fact that there was threats at the North home, and some of those threats included slash tires, lights blinking on and off outside the house, sand inside a gas tank, packages delivered to the mailbox. Is that a full characterization of the threats as related to you?
Well, there probably were some phone calls, obscene or threatening, and I believe that's about it. I might have left one or two.
Were the phone calls, do you know whether they were obscene, or do you know whether they were threatening?
Threatening.
Threatening, how would you, who told you about the phone calls? Let me ask that question.
I think General Secord mentioned it to me initially at the first time that he discussed implementing a security system at Colonel North's residence. Subsequently, I either heard it from General Secord and Colonel North in a more detailed fashion.
Did you ever talk to Mrs. North about any of these threats?
I touched on it, but Mrs. North impressed me as someone that would rather not discuss it. I think it frightened her, and I didn't feel it necessary that I carry on discussing these threats with her, that if I needed to know anything more, it's best that I get it from other sources such as Colonel North.
By her responses and by her demeanor, was it your feeling that she took these threats seriously?
Yes, she told me at one thing that sticks in my mind. She told me that Colonel North usually came home at midnight every night, and that she kept dinner for him until that time, and she felt, these are my words, she felt very uncomfortable until he got there, and that he ate dinner in a hurry and then went to bed, and that she felt much more secure much more comfortable when he was there, but he was never there.
You indicated, or I believe you did, that to your understanding, the government had supplied 1 or 2 security guards that slept in a garage.
At some point, and I believe Colonel North mentioned this, I think it was the visit to the old office building, he mentioned that he had had previously 2 guards who slept in his garage and that the arrangement was quite unsatisfactory.
Did he indicate why the arrangement was unsatisfactory?
No, he did not.
Did you take it by his answer that it was unsatisfactory because there were 2 strangers living on the premises?
I would say that seems accurate. And
how far was his garage from his house?
it was part of the residence.
It was attached to it?
Yes.
You, in March of 1987, I'm bringing you to that particular point, you
Yes.
went, upon the request of Oliver North, to his attorney's office, is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
And you indicated that you had a meeting about 40 minutes. Mr. North, or Lieutenant North, was on the phone about half the time, and the conversation you
Yes,
had
sir.
with him was very short.
Yes, sir.
He asked you while you were in the office and after the luncheon for copies of the documents, those documents being the 4 letters?
No, he never asked me for copies.
Did the attorney then ask you for those copies?
Yes, when we left the luncheon, Colonel North took me upstairs to his attorney's office, and the attorney asked me did I bring the documents. I showed them to him, and he said, may I make copies, and I approved.
Did the attorney ask for the originals or just to make copies?
No, he asked to make copies of what I had.
And he did not keep that which you gave him. He let you walk out with them.
Well, I had copies, and I don't know whether I mentioned earlier, I don't know whether he gave me my copies back or he kept his copies, but it's difficult to tell what is a copy of a copy.
I understand that. I guess the point I'm trying to make, perhaps not too clearly, is the following. Did either, and it's a legitimate question, did either Oliver North or his attorney in essence ask you for all the copies of these documents or not?
No, they just asked me for the ones that I had in my possession.
Thank you. Did either of them, either the attorney or Oliver North, suggest or ask you to testify in a certain way with respect to those documents?
Never, sir. Never.
I have no further questions.
Thank you. Senator Hatch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Robinette.
Yes, sir.
I just want to ask you a few questions to make sure that I'm clear on a few points. As I understand your testimony, you were contacted by Oliver North in December of 1986. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And at that time, Colonel North asked you for bills for the security system.
To bring bills, yes, sir.
And at that time, you had already paid for the security system.
Correct, sir.
Okay. Did you mention at that time to Colonel North, did you tell him that I've already been paid, or words to that effect?
No, sir.
Didn't say a thing about that?
No, sir.
Did Colonel North tell you to backdate the bills?
No, sir. That was my doing.
Then why did you feel you had to backdate the bills?
It was an effort to be helpful to Colonel North. One was, I think the bill in July was to show that it was done approximately, that was approximately the time that the system was completed, and the bill in September was to reflect the time that the system was operating satisfactorily.
If you really wanted to be helpful to him, wouldn't it have been better for you to tell him that the work has already been paid for? Then he could have said, if he didn't know about that, he could have said, well, my gosh, nobody should have paid for this.
That's correct, sir.
Wouldn't that have been better?
Possibly, sir, but it didn't occur to me at that time.
To your knowledge, did General Secord know that Colonel North was asking you to send these bills, these backdated bills?
No, sir.
Did you ever tell General Secord that there was no need to send the bills to Colonel North because they'd already been paid?
No, sir.
Have you ever stated to anyone that General Secord did not pay for the security system? I'm thinking in terms of Mr. Kleins.
No, sir.
Have you told Thomas Kleins in the past that General Secord had not in fact paid for the system?
No, sir.
Did Colonel North, to your knowledge, pay for any part of the security system?
Well, he reimbursed me for my payments, which I consider he paid for the system. Oh, I'm sorry,
talking about
sir.
Colonel North.
I'm sorry, sir. No, sir, he did not.
Never paid a dime?
No, sir. Sorry, sir.
Okay, did you realize that installation of this surveillance system could be not only misconstrued, but could be considered a bribe under certain federal statutes?
I understand that, sir.
You understand that now, or
Yes.
you realized it then?
I understand it now, sir.
I see. Well, throughout these hearings, Mr. Robinette, I've tried to be fair to these witnesses, especially when they've been assaulted with hearsay and, of course, based upon anonymous statements and so forth. But I have to tell you something. I find it a little difficult to avoid the feelings of being let down because of what you've told me here today.
Yes, sir.
It bothers me a great deal. I just want you to know that. And I appreciate having this testimony, but it's very bothersome to me.
Sir, this is a fact-finding hearing, and I've told you the facts to the best of my knowledge.
Well, I think you have, and I think you've been straightforward in what you've said. At least that's my belief.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Rudman.
Mr. Chairman, I just think that the record probably ought to show that for those people in America who don't understand the government very well, that people in Congress, people in the military, people in the executive branch receive many threats, some serious, some prank. Matter of fact, our chief counsel has probably, Mr. Lyman, has one of the greatest collection of threat letters I've seen recently. And the government does provide protective services depending on what branch you're in. No American government employee, be he a congressman, a senator, or a military officer, a member of the government who has a threat and is working in a threat environment, has any problem in getting security. Now, whether that security is at a level that's satisfactory to him as chairman, we don't know, but let the record show that this government does not leave its employees out on a limb. If they're threatened, this government tries to protect employees. That's just an observation. Mr. Robinette, only one question.
Yes, sir.
I listened very carefully to conversations you had in response to Senator Tribble and Senator Mitchell. And the fact is that at the time all these events happened with the exchange of letters, you knew this was essentially establishing what most people would refer to, and I'm sure you know the meaning of the word. It was a sham transaction. Your invoices, his letters, the whole thing was just a great story that was cooked. Isn't that correct?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. What would you have done if you had received a check for $8,000, Mr. Robinette, from Colonel North?
I would have given it to General Secord.
You've given it to General Secord?
Yes, sir.
Would you have been surprised if you had received a check for $8,000 from Colonel North?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so would I. Thank you.
Senator McClure.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. There's something in this that doesn't quite add up, and I want to go back over a little bit of your testimony to see if indeed I can find what it is. You've testified that you talked to Colonel North about the security system in his office.
Yes, sir.
And did you talk to Colonel North about that after that time, prior to the time you got the phone call?
I spoke to, I think the record shows I spoke to Colonel North both in the White House, a preliminary idea as to what I was going to do, and then about a week later I spoke to him in General Secord's office, being more specific and describing what I thought would be useful to fit his lifestyle.
And did you talk to him about that security system between that time and the time of the phone call when he asked, when he said you hadn't sent him a bill?
No, sir, I did not.
No conversations between you or he between those times about this system?
About that system, sir. Nothing else.
Now, would you were interrogated by the counsel for these committees
Yes, sir.
on June 17th, 1987. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do you have a copy of that deposition before you?
Yes, we do, Senator.
Would you turn to page 26, 27 of the deposition, please? Now, this reference in the deposition is to your conversations with Colonel North, is it not?
Yes, it is, sir.
And did you make an estimate to Colonel North, either at his request or somebody else's request, as to how much the system might cost?
I made the reference, sir.
And how much was that reference? How much was that estimate at that time?
It was $8,000 to $8,500.
And what did Colonel North say to you about that expense?
As I recollect, he concurred and said, made a statement regarding that he was a poor colonel and tried to keep it around that amount of money.
Now, doesn't that imply to you that Colonel North was going to pay for it?
It could be, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Colonel North says, keep the cost down. I'm only a poor colonel. I live on a colonel's pay. And how am I going to pay for an expensive security system? Please don't run the cost up above the $8,000, $8,500 you had estimated.
Yes, sir. At that time, that was his response.
All right. Why was it then that you assumed that he didn't intend to pay for it and that Secord was going to pay for it?
I didn't know at that time, sir.
Well, you had some time with no conversations with Colonel North after this time, and Colonel North at this time indicated he expected to pay for it.
He implied, it appeared that he was going to pay for it.
It appeared, and that's the only conversation you had with him about
Yes,
the
sir.
payment.
Correct, sir.
And he indicated to you he expected to pay for it, and yet at some point, for some reason, you assumed he wasn't going to pay for it.
Well, I continue to go back to General Secord for payment for my services and expenses, and
But there was no conversation with Colonel North that indicated that he didn't expect to pay
no,
for it.
sir, never.
That was an assumption on your part.
Yes, sir.
Did General Secord ever tell you that Colonel North wasn't going to pay for it?
No, sir, he never told me that.
So from the conversations you had with Colonel North, he expected to pay for it, and when you got the phone call from him, he said, "Why haven't you billed me?"
Correct, sir.
And you assumed when he made the phone call that he was initiating a cover-up.
I believe that's fair, sir.
Now, why did you assume that if the only conversation you'd ever had with him was in the context that he intended to pay for it?
Excuse me, Senator. I'd like my client to review that testimony, Your Honor.
Surely.
Excuse me, Senator.
Something missing in that whole story. I don't know what it is. It may be.
During that conversation in which I brought up the subject of the payment, Colonel North never said he was going to pay for it.
But you assumed from what he said that he was expecting to.
That would be a reasonable assumption, yes, sir.
Yeah. Otherwise, he wouldn't have cared what it cost, would he?
That's correct, sir.
All right. Why did you assume when he called you that he was initiating a cover-up if you'd have never had any indication from him that he didn't intend to pay for it, and you'd never had any conversation with General Secord that Colonel North was not to be expected to pay for it?
Sir, would you repeat that? I got lost on that.
Colonel North indicated to you he intended to pay for it.
Yes,
you
sir.
assumed at the beginning that was the import of what he told you.
Yes, sir.
And then from that time until the time of the phone call when he said, "You haven't sent me a bill," you had had no conversations with him and concerning this security system.
Correct, sir.
And General Secord had not told you that Colonel North wasn't going to pay for it.
Correct, sir.
But you got a phone call from Colonel North and you assumed at that point that there was a cover-up underway. Now, why did you make that assumption at that time if no one had ever indicated to you that Colonel North was not to be expected to pay for it?
Thank you, sir. I had been paid for the system, and to receive a phone call from Colonel North asking to bill him did come as a surprise.
But it didn't surprise you enough that you asked him about it.
To ask him about it at that time, sir? No, sir. That was at a period of time when he was prominently displayed through all the news media. He had his hands full of problems which I would comment that seem much bigger than a security system. And if he felt it necessary to call me on the telephone to ask me to submit bills, I certainly surmise that he needed them.
Mr. Chairman, I know my time is up, but Mr. Robinette, I
Yes, sir.
cannot help but comment that there's something that disconnects between those events that doesn't make sense to me. That if you expected Colonel North to pay for it, even though General Secord had paid for it, you should, it seems to me, have been surprised that he called you to ask you why you hadn't sent a bill, or put it in the alternative, why you would assume at that point that a cover-up was being initiated. Mr. Stokes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Robinette, in your deposition given to this committee, you indicate that General Secord in October of 1986 requested that you make a trip to Costa Rica. At that time, he provided you with the sum of $11,000. You recall that?
That's correct, sir.
Then subsequently, I think on the 24th of November, you went to Costa Rica and you returned on the 29th of November.
That's correct,
So
sir.
a 5-day trip.
Yes.
What was the purpose of that trip?
To go to San Jose to talk to individuals or to solicit information regarding defendants in the civil suit against General Secord.
And what was the purpose of the $11,000?
To pay for travel expenses and any expenses that I might incur in paying to sources.
Well, what is airfare? Where'd you leave, from Washington, D.C.?
Yes, sir.
What is airfare from Washington, D.C. to Costa Rica and return?
Round trip, sir?
Yes, sir.
Yes, probably around $1,000.
Right. That leaves you about $10,000?
Yes, sir.
And what'd you do with the $10,000?
I gave it to certain people, spread it out through certain people down there.
Well, give us an idea what you're talking about when you say you gave it to certain people, sort of spread it out.
Well, it was necessary that I get as much information as possible that would be helpful in the civil suit. And I had to, in effect, pay people to tell me the information that I wanted to know.
And how much of the $10,000 did you spend on paying people to tell you what you need to know?
Well, I think probably 7 or 8.
Okay. And then you return with about $3,000?
Yes, sir. 2,000 to 3,000. That's my guesstimate, sir.
What'd you do with the $3,000?
Kept it, sir.
It was income to you?
Yes, sir.
Okay. On your calendar, which is reflected here under Exhibit 1.
Yes, sir.
Under date July 19th, you show two names. One is Buck Revell, and the other is Leonard Garment.
Just
see
a moment,
those?
Mr. Chairman and Congressman Stokes, I have discussed previously with Mr. Lyman, Mr. Barbadaro, Mr. Van Cleve, and other members of the staff that there are certain matters, one of which Congressman Stokes has just touched on, that will require me to invoke the provisions of Rule 12 and respectfully request that this committee conduct the questioning on that issue in executive session. Mr. Barbadaro, I believe, has more fully described, and Mr. Van Cleve, to the chairman, both of the majority and the minority, the reasons for that, and I will have to, respectfully to Congressman Stokes, will have to direct my client not to answer the question unless we go into executive session.
The chair directs the witness not to respond to that question.
Yes, sir.
Well, if I may be heard, Mr. Chairman, firstly, all I have done is ask about two names. I asked about the name Buck Revell and the name Leonard Garment. I haven't asked any questions other than read two individuals' names. I am not privy
to whatever counsel is referring to. Now, I would think as a member of the panel, I would be entitled to have someone inform me of some rationale or reasons for my not being able to pose any questions relative to this matter.
May we have a short recess? Counsel, why don't you go down there?
Interesting.
No, they sure.
Chairman Stokes?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Robinette, who is Buck Revell?
To my understanding, he is an executive director of the FBI.
And how long have you known him?
I don't know him, sir.
Did you, on July 19th, have an appointment with him?
No, sir.
Tell us the purpose for which his name appears on your calendar.
Mr. Chairman, we're faced with the same situation. I believe that Congressman Stokes and other members of the committee have been advised of the nature of the concern that we have, and I believe Mr. Barbadaro has informed the committee of a more recent expression by counsel as to what our concern is. I really cannot allow my client to answer this question, to go into this line of questioning in open session for reasons that I've explained to Mr. Barbadaro.
We will take this matter in an executive session.
Mr. Chairman, it was my understanding during the recess that counsel for the committee was going to talk with Mr. Robinette's counsel, and I thought by the resumption of the hearing that this matter had been worked out. I was not advised that it had not been worked out. I'm advised by Mr. Niels that he'd like to speak to me regarding that, if the chair will indulge us.
Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Please proceed, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I will at this time withdraw my question to the witness, and I have no further questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Mr. Robinette.
Yes, sir.
In response to a question relating to a telephone call from the colonel in which he said, "When are you going to send me the bill?" you testified that you assumed that this was part of a cover-up. Isn't that correct?
Yes, sir.
Wasn't this assumption of yours not only clarified but confirmed when you received the 2 phony letters?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. The committee will stand in recess until 2 o'clock.
Thank you, sir.
You got to stand by the last one. Let's make it, no, that's making the closing. Yeah.